Detective Lisa Rodriguez had been dreaming about this moment for 3 long years. After spending countless nights dealing with crime scenes, chasing down leads, and writing reports until her eyes burned, she finally had her own little piece of paradise. The small farm sat on 12 acres of rolling hills just outside the city limits, far enough from the chaos of downtown, but close enough that she could still make it to work when duty called. Saturday morning came with the kind of perfect weather that made her feel like she had made the right choice. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange. Lisa pulled on her oldest pair of jeans, the ones with paint stains and a small tear near the knee, and grabbed a faded blue t-shirt from her dresser. This was her sanctuary time, and she dressed the part. Walking out to her vegetable garden, she breathed in the clean morning air. No car exhaust, no city noise, just the gentle sounds of birds waking up and a light breeze rustling through the trees. She had planted tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and herbs in neat rows, and seeing the tiny green shoots pushing up through the dark soil filled her with a satisfaction she never got from closing cases. Lisa knelt down beside the tomato plants, checking for any signs of pests or disease. Her detective training made her naturally observant, and she noticed everything from the slight browning on one leaf to the way the morning dew collected differently on various plants. This attention to detail that served her so well in police. Work was now helping her grow her own food. She was completely absorbed in her gardening when a sharp voice cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing here?" Lisa looked up to see a woman standing at the property line, her phone already clutched in one hand, while the other was planted firmly on her hip. The woman appeared to be in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a jogging outfit that looked like it had never seen actual exercise. Her face was set in an expression of righteous indignation that Lisa recognized from years of dealing with difficult witnesses. "Good morning," Lisa said calmly, standing up and brushing the dirt off her knees. "I'm just tending to my garden." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Your garden? I don't think so. This property has been empty for months. Who gave you permission to be here?" Lisa felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had dealt with confrontational people countless times in her job, but this was supposed to be her safe space. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Lisa Rodriguez, and I own this property. I bought it 3 months ago." "That's impossible," the woman snapped. "Someone your age couldn't possibly afford land like this. Are you squatting here? Because I'll have you know that I'm very active in the Neighborhood Watch program, and we don't tolerate illegal activity." The accusation hit Lisa like a slap. She was 32 years old and had worked 2 jobs through college before joining the police force. Every penny of the down payment for this farm had come from years of saving, overtime shifts, and living in a tiny apartment with barely any furniture. But looking at this woman's expensive workout clothes and judgmental expression, Lisa realized that explanations might not matter. "I understand your concern for the neighborhood," Lisa said, keeping her voice level and professional. "But I can assure you that I'm the legal owner of this property. I have all the paperwork inside if you'd like to see it." The woman took a step back as if Lisa had threatened her. "Don't come any closer. I don't know what kind of game you're running here, but I've been watching you. You're out here at all hours, making trips to the hardware store with cash, and I've never once seen you leave for a real job. That's not normal behavior for honest people." Lisa almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Her suspicious early morning hours were simply because she enjoyed watching the sunrise and getting her garden work done before the day got too hot. The cash purchases at the hardware store were because she was old-fashioned and liked keeping track of her spending. And the reason this woman never saw her leave for work was because Lisa worked rotating shifts and often left through her back gate to avoid the main road traffic. But trying to explain any of this to someone who had already made up her mind seemed pointless. Lisa had seen this type of person before during her police work, the kind who saw patterns where none existed and built elaborate theories based on incomplete information. "I work for the city," Lisa said simply, hoping that might calm the situation. "I have unusual hours, but I can assure you that everything I'm doing here is completely legal." "The city?" The woman's voice rose an octave. "Doing what exactly?" And why won't you tell me your name or show me some identification? Honest people don't act so secretive. Lisa was starting to feel trapped. Her badge and service weapon were locked in a gun safe inside the house, as they should be when she was off duty. She wasn't carrying any identification because she was just gardening on her own property. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had spent years helping people in situations exactly like this, and now she was on the receiving end of someone's paranoid suspicions. "Look," Lisa said, trying one more time to reason with her neighbor. "I know this might seem strange, but I really am the owner here. My name is Lisa Rodriguez, and I work as a detective with the city police department. I bought this place because I wanted somewhere quiet to relax after work." The woman's face flushed red. "A detective? You expect me to believe that? You look like you're barely out of college and you're dressed like a vagrant. Real police officers don't sneak around gardens at dawn like criminals." That comment stung more than Lisa wanted to admit. She had worked incredibly hard to earn her position, and she was good at her job. But she realized that in her gardening clothes, with dirt under her fingernails and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, she probably didn't look like anyone's idea of a law enforcement officer. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Lisa could see other neighbors starting to take notice. A man walking his dog had stopped to watch from across the street. Someone in the house next door was peering through their blinds. The last thing she wanted was to become the subject of neighborhood gossip before she had even properly moved in. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here," Lisa said, keeping her voice calm despite her growing frustration. "I'm just trying to enjoy my morning and take care of my property. I'm not bothering anyone, and I'm certainly not doing anything illegal." But the woman was beyond listening to reason. Her phone was now raised, and Lisa could see her finger hovering over the screen with the unmistakable intensity of someone about to make a call. The peaceful morning that had started with such promise was about to become something much more complicated. Lisa stood there in her garden, dirt on her clothes and confusion in her heart, watching as her new neighbor prepared to turn her quiet Saturday into the kind of situation she usually only dealt with while wearing a badge. The woman's suspicions were growing by the minute, and Lisa could see the wheels turning in her head. What had started as a simple case of mistaken identity was quickly becoming something much more serious in her neighbor's mind. "You know what, I think?" the woman said, pacing back and forth along the property line like a caged animal. "I think you're running some kind of operation here. Nobody just suddenly appears in a neighborhood and starts digging around in gardens at the crack of dawn, unless they're up to something." Lisa watched in disbelief as her neighbor began building an elaborate theory based on absolutely nothing. The woman pulled out a small notebook from her pocket and started flipping through pages, as if she had been keeping a detailed record of Lisa's activities. "Let me tell you what I've observed," the woman continued, her voice getting louder and more confident. "3 weeks ago, you showed up here with a moving truck. But here's the strange part. It wasn't a regular moving company. It was just a plain white truck with no markings. That's red flag number 1. Lisa remembered that day clearly. She had rented the cheapest truck she could find because she was trying to save money. The moving company trucks were all booked up, and she had found a great deal on a basic rental truck. But she could see how that might look suspicious to someone who was determined to find problems. "Red flag number 2, the woman went on, consulting her notebook like she was presenting evidence in court. "You've been making multiple trips to Rodriguez hardware store, and you always pay in cash. I've seen you there at least 6 times in the past month. What kind of legitimate homeowner needs that much hardware store supplies?" The irony of the woman mentioning Rodriguez hardware store wasn't lost on Lisa. It was actually owned by her uncle, which was one of the reasons she had chosen to move to this area. Family connections meant everything to her, and being close to her uncle's business was a bonus. But the cash payments were simply because her uncle gave her a family discount when she paid in cash, helping her stretch her budget further. "And another thing," the woman continued, her voice rising with each accusation. "I've been keeping track of your schedule. You leave at weird hours, sometimes at night, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes you're gone for days at a time. That's not normal behavior for someone with a regular job." Lisa wanted to explain that her work schedule as a detective was anything but regular. Some weeks she worked day shifts, other weeks she was on nights. When there was a major case, she might be gone for days following leads or attending training sessions. But she realized that trying to explain police scheduling to someone who was already convinced she was a criminal would probably make things worse. "You want to know what I really think?" the woman said, stepping closer to the fence but staying what she clearly considered a safe distance away. "I think you're dealing drugs. All that coming and going at strange hours, the cash payments, the secretive behavior, it all adds up." The accusation hit Lisa like a punch to the gut. She had spent years of her life fighting against drug dealers, working undercover operations and risking her safety to get dangerous substances off the streets. The idea that someone would accuse her of being involved in the very thing she had dedicated her career to stopping was almost too much to bear. "That's a very serious accusation," Lisa said, her professional training kicking in. "And it's completely false. I can assure you that I have never been involved in any illegal drug activity." But the woman was on a roll now, and Lisa's calm response only seemed to fuel her suspicions further. "Of course you'd deny it. That's exactly what someone guilty would say. And you know what else? I bet you're not even using your real name. Lisa Rodriguez. That sounds made up to me." Lisa almost laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. Her name was about as real as it got, and she had the birth certificate, social security card, and years of employment records to prove it, but she was starting to understand that facts wouldn't matter to someone who had already made up their mind. The woman pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of Lisa's property. "I'm documenting everything," she announced. "The police are going to want evidence when I report this." "Evidence of what exactly?" Lisa asked, genuinely curious about what this woman thought she was capturing on camera. "Evidence of your illegal activities," the woman replied as if it should be obvious. "Look at this place. You've got vegetables growing in perfect rows. That's clearly a cover for what you're really growing. And I bet if we looked closer, we'd find your real crop hidden somewhere in the back." Lisa looked at her neat rows of tomatoes, peppers, and lettuce with new eyes. To her, they represented peaceful mornings and the satisfaction of growing her own food. But apparently, to her neighbor, they looked like evidence of a criminal enterprise. "Those are vegetables," Lisa said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, herbs. You can see them from where you're standing." "That's what you want people to think," the woman shot back. "But I've watched enough crime shows to know how these operations work. You grow a few normal plants out front to throw people off, and you keep the real stuff hidden in the back, where nobody can see it." Lisa was beginning to realize that her neighbor had been watching too much television and not enough reality. The woman's understanding of how drug operations actually worked seemed to come entirely from fictional shows, but her conviction was absolutely real. "And another thing," the woman continued, now pacing faster as she built up steam. "I've never seen any friends or family visit you. What kind of normal person doesn't have visitors? It's because you're hiding something, isn't it? You can't let people get too close because they might figure out what you're really doing." The comment about visitors stung because it was partially true, but for completely innocent reasons. Lisa hadn't had many visitors because she was still settling in and most of her friends and family lived across town. She had been so busy with work and getting the farm set up that she hadn't had time for much socializing. But she could see how that might look suspicious to someone who was determined to find problems. "Listen," Lisa said, trying one more time to reason with her neighbor. "I know this might all seem strange from the outside, but I promise you that there's a perfectly innocent explanation for everything you've observed. I'm just a regular person who wanted to move somewhere quiet and grow some vegetables." But the woman had moved beyond listening. She was now completely convinced that she had uncovered a major criminal operation, and nothing Lisa could say was going to change her mind. The peaceful Saturday morning had turned into something that felt more like an interrogation. And Lisa was starting to realize that this situation was about to get much worse before it got better. The woman looked at her phone, then back at Lisa, and her expression shifted into something that looked almost like triumph. "You know what? I think it's time to call in the professionals. Let the police sort this out." The woman held her phone up like it was a weapon, and Lisa could see the determination in her eyes. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. Her neighbor had convinced herself that she was about to expose a major criminal operation, and she was ready to be the hero of her own story. "I'm calling 911 right now," the woman announced loudly, making sure that anyone within earshot could hear her. "There's a dangerous individual on my street, and I'm not going to stand by and let this continue." Lisa watched as more neighbors started to appear. The man walking his dog had now stopped completely and was openly staring at the scene unfolding. A woman across the street came out to get her newspaper, but stayed on her porch, clearly listening to every word. Two teenagers on bikes slowed down as they passed, their phones already out and recording. "Please," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the growing audience. "There's really no need to call the police. I'm just gardening on my own property. I'm not doing anything wrong." But her neighbor was already dialing, and Lisa could see that any attempt at reason was pointless. The woman had made up her mind, and now she was going to make sure everyone knew what a concerned citizen she was. "Yes, I need to report suspicious activity," the woman said into her phone, her voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "There's someone on my street who I believe is involved in illegal drug activity." Lisa felt her heart sink as she listened to her neighbor paint a picture of her that was completely false, but probably sounded convincing to someone who didn't know the real story. "She's been here for about a month," the woman continued, pacing back and forth while talking to the dispatcher. "She has no regular job that I can see, but she's always making trips to the hardware store with cash. She's growing plants in her backyard that she claims are vegetables, but I think they're something else entirely." The way her neighbor was describing her made Lisa sound like some kind of criminal mastermind. Every innocent activity was being twisted into evidence of wrongdoing. Her cash purchases became suspicious transactions. Her garden became a drug operation. Her irregular work schedule became proof that she didn't have legitimate employment. "And another thing," the woman said, getting more animated as she talked. "She's been very secretive about her identity. When I asked her for identification, she refused to show me anything. She claims to be a police detective, but that's obviously a lie. Have you ever seen a police detective who looks like a teenager and dresses like a homeless person?" Lisa looked down at her gardening clothes and felt a flush of embarrassment. She had put on her oldest, most comfortable clothes because she was planning to spend the morning working in the dirt, but she could see how her appearance might not match what people expected from a law enforcement officer. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She had spent countless hours responding to calls just like this one. Concerned citizens reporting suspicious activity that usually turned out to be completely innocent. She had always tried to be patient with people who were worried about their neighborhoods, understanding that fear could make people see threats where none existed. "Yes, I'll stay on the line," the woman said to the dispatcher. "And yes, I feel threatened. She's been acting very aggressively toward me, and I'm concerned for my safety." Lisa's mouth dropped open. She had been nothing but polite and calm throughout the entire encounter. She had never raised her voice, never made any threatening gestures, and had kept her distance from the property line. But apparently, her neighbor's version of events was very different from reality. "I'm also concerned about the other residents in the area," the woman continued. "If she's dealing drugs, then we could have all kinds of dangerous people coming through our neighborhood. We have children here and elderly residents. This is a family-friendly area, and we can't have criminal elements moving in." Lisa could see how her neighbor's words were affecting the other people who were watching. The man with the dog was now talking quietly on his own phone, probably calling his wife or a friend to tell them about the excitement. The woman across the street had been joined by her husband, and they were both staring at Lisa with suspicious expressions. "The police are on their way," the woman announced after hanging up her phone. "They said they're taking this very seriously and will be here within 15 minutes. Lisa felt a mix of emotions. Part of her was frustrated and embarrassed by the whole situation, but another part of her was actually relieved. Once the police arrived, she could easily prove her identity and put an end to this ridiculous misunderstanding. She knew most of the officers in the area, and they would recognize her immediately. "I hope you're satisfied," the woman said, crossing her arms and giving Lisa a look of triumph. "You thought you could just move into our neighborhood and do whatever you wanted, but we look out for each other here. We don't tolerate criminal activity." Lisa wanted to point out that she hadn't done anything criminal, but she realized that her neighbor was now performing for the growing audience. More people had come out of their houses to see what all the commotion was about. There was even an elderly man who had brought a folding chair out to his front porch, as if he was settling in to watch a show. "You know what I think?" the woman said, her voice carrying across the street. "I think you picked the wrong neighborhood. We're not the kind of people who just mind our own business when we see something suspicious. We care about our community, and we're not afraid to stand up to criminals." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Lisa could see that her neighbor was enjoying her moment in the spotlight. She had positioned herself as the neighborhood hero, the brave citizen who was willing to confront danger to protect her community. Lisa tried to imagine how she would handle this situation if she were the responding officer. She would probably start by asking both parties to explain their side of the story. She would check identification and run background checks. She would look for any signs of actual criminal activity. And she would try to calm everyone down and get to the truth. But being on the other side of the situation was completely different. She felt helpless and frustrated, knowing that she was innocent but unable to prove it without her badge and identification. All she could do was wait for the police to arrive and hope that the responding officer would be someone she knew. "There, they are," someone in the crowd said, pointing down the street. Lisa looked up to see a patrol car turning onto her street, its lights flashing, but no siren. The sight of the police car made her feel both relieved and nervous. She was about to be rescued from this embarrassing situation, but she was also about to find out if her reputation in the department was strong enough to overcome the picture her neighbor had painted. The patrol car pulled up to the curb, and Lisa watched as the officer got out. Even from a distance, she could see that it was someone she recognized, and she felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. This was about to get very interesting. Officer Tony Martinez stepped out of the patrol car, and Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had worked with Tony for over 5 years, and he was one of the most level-headed officers on the force. If anyone could handle this situation, with professionalism and maybe even a little humor, it was him. But Tony didn't look her way immediately. Instead, he focused on the crowd that had gathered, scanning the scene with the practiced eye of someone who had dealt with neighborhood disputes countless times before. Lisa could see him taking mental notes. The agitated woman at the property line, the curious neighbors watching from a safe distance, and the person in gardening clothes standing quietly in the middle of what appeared to be a vegetable garden. The neighbor rushed toward Tony before he had even closed his car door completely. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I'm the one who called. I'm Janet Thompson and I live right there," she said, pointing to the house next door. "I've been documenting suspicious activity from this individual for weeks now." Lisa watched as Janet pulled out her notebook and phone, ready to present her evidence like she was a star witness in a major criminal trial. Tony listened patiently, nodding occasionally and asking a few basic questions, but his expression remained neutral and professional. "She claims her name is Lisa Rodriguez," Janet continued, her voice getting louder as she warmed to her subject. "But I don't believe that for a second. She says she owns this property, but that's impossible. Someone her age couldn't afford land like this unless they were involved in illegal activities." Tony glanced over at Lisa, and she could see just the slightest hint of recognition in his eyes. But he was too professional to let anything show, and he continued listening to Janet's increasingly dramatic account of the morning's events. "And another thing," Janet went on. "She claims to be a police detective. Can you believe that? Look at her. Does she look like any police officer you've ever seen? It's obviously a lie, and probably a serious crime to impersonate a law enforcement officer." Lisa could see Tony struggling to keep a straight face. He knew exactly what she looked like in uniform, with her hair pulled back professionally and her badge prominently displayed. But he also knew that most officers looked pretty different when they were off duty and relaxing at home. "Ma'am," Tony said politely, "I appreciate your concern for the neighborhood. Let me just have a word with the individual in question, and then I'll get back to you with more information." Janet looked like she wanted to continue her presentation, but Tony was already walking toward Lisa. The crowd of neighbors pressed closer, clearly not wanting to miss whatever was about to happen next. Good morning, Tony said formally as he approached Lisa. I'm Officer Martinez with the city police. I understand there's been some confusion here today. Lisa looked at Tony, and she could see the amusement dancing in his eyes even though his expression remained completely professional. Good morning, Officer Martinez, she replied, playing along with the formal tone. I'm Lisa Rodriguez, and yes, there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. I see, Tony said, pulling out his notebook. The caller has expressed some concerns about your activities and your presence on this property. Do you have any identification I could see? This was the moment Lisa had been waiting for. Of course, she said. My identification is inside the house. Would you mind if I went to get it? That would be helpful, Tony replied. I'll escort you to make sure everything is done properly. Lisa could hear Janet's voice rising behind them. Don't let her go inside alone. She could be destroying evidence or getting a weapon. Tony turned around and addressed the crowd. I'm going to ask everyone to please step back and give us some space to work. I'll update you all once I have more information. Lisa walked toward her front door with Tony beside her, and she could feel the eyes of the entire neighborhood watching, their every move. The irony of being escorted to her own home by a colleague wasn't lost on her, but she had to admit there was something almost entertaining about the whole situation. This is quite a morning you're having, Tony said quietly as they reached the front porch, his professional facade cracking just slightly. You have no idea, Lisa replied. I was just trying to check on my tomatoes. Inside the house, Lisa walked over to the small safe where she kept her badge, service weapon, and other important documents when she was off duty. She could hear Janet's voice carrying through the open window, apparently giving the gathered crowd a detailed recap of everything that had happened. She's been acting suspicious for weeks, Janet was saying. I kept detailed notes because I knew something like this would happen. You can't just ignore warning signs when they're right in front of you. Lisa shook her head as she opened the safe and pulled out her badge wallet. The leather case felt familiar and reassuring in her hands. She had carried it every day for years, and it represented everything she had worked for in her career. Ready? Tony asked, and Lisa could see that he was actually looking forward to what was about to happen. They walked back outside together, and Lisa could see that the crowd had grown even larger. Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood that something interesting was happening, and people had come from several blocks away to see what all the excitement was about. Janet was still holding court, explaining to anyone who would listen about the importance of neighborhood vigilance and how she had single-handedly uncovered what she was convinced was a major criminal operation. The thing is, Janet was saying to a new arrival, you can't just trust what people tell you. Anyone can claim to be anything these days. You have to look at the evidence and use common sense. Tony cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. If I could have everyone's attention, please, he said in his official police voice. I've completed my initial investigation and I have some information to share. The crowd fell silent immediately. Even the teenagers who had been whispering and taking pictures stopped what they were doing and focused on Tony. First, Tony continued, I want to thank the caller for her concern about neighborhood safety. It's always important for residents to look out for each other and report anything that seems unusual. Janet beamed with pride, clearly feeling vindicated by Tony's words. However, Tony went on, after speaking with the individual in question and reviewing her identification, I can confirm that everything she has told you is completely accurate. Lisa could see confusion starting to spread through the crowd. This wasn't the dramatic arrest that Janet had been expecting. The individual has provided proper identification, Tony continued, and I can verify that she is indeed the legal owner of this property. Janet's confident expression was starting to waver. But what about her claim to be a police officer? She called out. Surely you can see that's obviously false. Tony looked at Lisa and nodded slightly. This was her moment. Lisa held up her badge wallet and slowly opened it, revealing the gold detective shield that caught the morning sunlight. The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear birds chirping in the distance and the yow sound of a lawnmower several streets away. The expression on Janet's face was absolutely priceless. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Lisa could see Janet's face cycling through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally, a deep red flush that started at her neck and worked its way up to her forehead. The neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama unfold were now looking back and forth between Lisa's badge and Janet, trying to process what they had just witnessed. That's impossible," Janet stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't be a real detective. You're too young, and you don't look anything like—" Her voice trailed off as she realized that every word she spoke was just digging her deeper into an embarrassing hole. The crowd around her was starting to murmur, and not in the supportive way she had been enjoying earlier. Tony stepped forward, his professional demeanor intact, but with just a hint of amusement in his voice. "Detective Rodriguez is a highly respected member of our department," he said clearly, making sure everyone could hear. "She's been with the force for 8 years and has an excellent service record." Lisa watched as the reality of the situation sank in for everyone watching. The man with the dog was shaking his head and walking away, clearly embarrassed that he had been part of the spectacle. The woman across the street had disappeared back into her house, probably hoping that Lisa hadn't noticed her staring. Even the teenagers who had been recording everything were now looking uncomfortable and putting their phones away. But it was Janet's reaction that Lisa found most interesting. Instead of apologizing or trying to make amends, Janet seemed to be getting more defensive. "Well, how was I supposed to know?" she said, her voice rising again. "You should have told me who you were from the beginning." Lisa closed her badge, wallet, and slipped it back into her pocket. "I did tell you," she said calmly. "Several times, actually. But you had already made up your mind about who you thought I was." "But you don't look like a police officer," Janet protested, as if that somehow justified everything that had happened. "What exactly should a police officer look like?" Lisa asked, genuinely curious about Janet's answer. Janet opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to realize that anything she said would probably make things worse. Tony took advantage of the pause to address the remaining crowd. "All right, everyone. The situation has been resolved," he announced. "Detective Rodriguez is exactly who she says she is, and there's no criminal activity taking place here. I'm going to ask everyone to please return to your homes and give the detective some privacy." Most of the neighbors took the hint and started to disperse, many of them looking embarrassed about their involvement in the morning's drama. But a few lingered, clearly hoping for more excitement or perhaps wanting to apologize to Lisa for their suspicions. An elderly man who lived 3 houses down approached Lisa with a sheepish expression. "I want to apologize," he said. "I should have minded my own business instead of assuming the worst. Welcome to the neighborhood." Lisa appreciated his honesty. "Thank you," she said. "And don't worry about it. I understand how things might have looked from the outside." A young mother with 2 small children also came over. "I'm really sorry about all this," she said. "Janet can be, well, she means well, but sometimes she gets carried away. Most of us aren't like that." Lisa smiled at the children who were staring at her with wide eyes. "It's okay," she told their mother. "These things happen. I'm just glad we got it all sorted out." As the crowd continued to thin out, Tony approached Lisa with a grin he could no longer hide. "Well, Detective Rodriguez," he said, "I have to say this is definitely going in my report as one of the more interesting calls I've responded to this month. Please tell me you're not going to share this story with everyone at the station," Lisa said, though she was smiling too. "Are you kidding?" Tony laughed. "This is going to be legendary. Wait until Captain Williams hears about how you got accused of being a drug dealer for growing tomatoes." Lisa groaned, knowing that her colleagues would never let her live this down. But she had to admit, now that it was over, there was something almost funny about the whole situation. Janet was still standing at the property line, looking lost and embarrassed. Lisa could see that she was struggling with what to do next. Part of Lisa wanted to just go back to her gardening and pretend the whole thing had never happened. But another part of her recognized that Janet was probably a decent person who had just gotten carried away by her own imagination and fear. After Tony finished filling out his report and left with a promise to keep the story just between us, which they both knew was a complete lie. Lisa found herself alone with Janet for the first time since the morning had started. "I suppose you think I'm a terrible person," Janet said quietly, not meeting Lisa's eyes. Lisa considered her response carefully. She could have been angry, or sarcastic, or cold. Janet had certainly put her through an embarrassing and frustrating morning. But looking at her neighbor's genuinely ashamed expression, Lisa decided to take a different approach. "I think you're someone who cares about her neighborhood," Lisa said. "Maybe you cared a little too much today, but that's not necessarily a bad thing." Janet looked up, surprised by Lisa's response. "I really did think... everything seemed so suspicious." "I know," Lisa said, "and I understand why. If I had been in your position, seeing what you saw without knowing the real story, I might have had questions too. But I should have talked to you more," Janet said. "Instead of jumping to conclusions and calling the police, I feel like such an idiot." Lisa thought about all the times in her career when she had responded to calls from people who had jumped to the wrong conclusions. Fear and misunderstanding could make anyone act in ways they later regretted. "Look," Lisa said, "we're going to be neighbors for a long time. How about we start over? I'm Lisa Rodriguez, and I'm a detective with the city police. I work weird hours, I like to garden, and I'm probably going to be the most boring neighbor you've ever had." For the first time all morning, Janet smiled. "I'm Janet Thompson. I'm retired, I probably watch too much TV, and I apparently have an overactive imagination." They shook hands across the property line, and Lisa felt like maybe this whole disaster might actually have a positive ending after all. "Can I ask you something?" Janet said. "What made you want to become a police officer?" Lisa looked back at her garden, thinking about all the reasons she had chosen her career. "I wanted to help people," she said simply. "Sometimes that means catching the bad guys, but sometimes it just means being there when people need someone to listen." As Janet walked back toward her house, Lisa returned to her tomato plants. The morning hadn't gone anything like she had planned, but she had learned something important about her new community. People here looked out for each other, even if they sometimes got it wrong. And maybe, just maybe, she had made her first real friend in the neighborhood.